If you like dogs, you probably know that different breeds don't just vary in their physical appearance, but also in their behavior. Dogs can be bred for specific behaviors, which is crucial for understanding heredity. It's not only physical traits that are inherited, cognitive traits are heritable as well. Take herding dogs, for example. A herding dog doesn't need to attend school or earn a degree in sheep herding, it instinctively knows how to herd because it's in its DNA. That's why herding dogs living in big cities with no sheep sometimes try to herd cars or children. Herding isn't just work to them, it's a purpose that fulfills them. This basic truth of nature will cause significant problems in our society, but I'll discuss that later. First, let's talk about heritability. We can observe it all around us. People with darker skin tend to have children with darker skin, and tall parents often have tall children. Even before DNA was discovered, people understood this concept, though they used different terms. In old stories, phrases like "he has his father's blood" or "European blood" appear. While not biologically accurate, they reflect an awareness that traits run in families. This curiosity led to twin studies, which are incredibly powerful for understanding heredity. Twins can be identical, developing from a single fertilized egg that splits into two embryos, or fraternal, developing from two separate eggs fertilized by separate sperm. Identical twins share the same DNA sequence, they are genetically identical. Fraternal twins are genetically similar to ordinary siblings. This makes twin studies ideal for separating the effects of genetics or nature from environment or nurture. If you have a fraternal twin brother who grows up in the same household, attends the same school, and receives similar parental attention, your IQ scores will correlate around 0.65. But if you have an identical twin brother, your IQ scores will be almost as similar as if you took the same test twice. Like one and the same person taking two IQ tests back to back. Some argue this similarity is due to shared environment, but if that were true, fraternal twins raised together would show similar IQ correlations, which they don't. Many don't appreciate the significance of this. Children raised in the same orphanage, sharing the exact same environment, still show as much IQ variation as children in the general population. Moreover, identical twins raised apart have an IQ correlation around 0.75, about a 5-point difference in IQ, showing that environment matters but genetics plays a stronger role. Identical twins raised separately are more similar in IQ than fraternal twins raised together. So far, we've discussed what we observe and what twin studies tell us, but after the discovery and decoding of the human genome, there is a third method to demonstrate the importance of genetics. Genome-wide association studies. A GWAS scans the genomes of thousands of people to identify genetic variants called SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms that occur more frequently in people with a particular trait or disease. Researchers test each SNP for statistical association with the trait, and significant SNPs point to genomic regions that may influence it. Polygenic scores are numbers estimating a person's genetic predisposition for a trait or disease. They are calculated by summing the effects of many genetic variants across the genome, each weighted by how strongly it's associated with the trait in a GWAS. In simple terms, a polygenic score can make fairly accurate predictions about a person based solely on their DNA. For example, here you can see predicted height versus actual height using a polygenic score. If one man is 180 centimeters tall and another is 185 centimeters tall, the 5 centimeters difference between them is largely influenced by genetics. Studies estimate that about 80% of height variation across individuals is genetic. Applying this to the 5 centimeters difference means roughly 4 centimeters of that difference is genetically determined. Current polygenic scores, which aggregate many known genetic variants, can explain about half of this genetic influence. This means approximately 2 centimeters of the 5 centimeters height difference can be predicted from known genetic variants. The remaining 3 centimeters results from environmental factors such as nutrition and health during development, unknown genetic variants not yet identified, and random biological variation. Let me say this again. If you are 180 centimeters and your brother is 185 centimeters, 80% of the height difference is genetic, and we already know the exact genes for half of the genetic differences. Less than 1 centimeter is due to environmental factors. If one person has an IQ score of 100 and another scores 85, there is a 15-point difference between them. IQ heritability estimates suggest that about 80% of the variation in IQ scores across the population is due to genetic differences. Applying this to the 15-point difference means that roughly 80% of those 15 points, about 12 points, can be attributed to genetic factors. The remaining 20% of the difference, or about 3 points, is influenced by environmental factors such as education, nutrition, upbringing, and other life experiences, as well as random factors like measurement error. This doesn't mean that genetics alone determine a person's IQ or that environmental factors are unimportant. Instead, it means that when comparing two individuals' IQ scores, most of the difference between them tends to come from inherited genetic differences. However, environment and other influences still have a small impact and can affect cognitive development. In summary, of the 15-point IQ gap between these two people, about 12 points reflect genetic differences, while around 3 points result from non-genetic factors. Why is it important to have a high IQ?
So how smart do you have to be different things in life? Well, if you have an IQ of 116 to 130, which is 85th percentile and above, so it's 1 person in 8 up to 1 person in 1/3. 1 person in 8 to 1 person in 20. Then you can be an attorney, a research analyst, an editor, an advertising manager, a chemist, an engineer, an executive manager, etc. Now, that's not the high end for IQ, by the way. That it can go up, it can go up indefinitely.
IQ is the #1 predictor of financial success. There is no better way to predict someone's income than IQ. Someone with an IQ below 80 will almost never be able to create enough value to be considered a net positive to any company. The U.S. Army does not accept individuals with an IQ below 80. While the Army's minimum enlistment standard is a score of 31 on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, which roughly correlates to an IQ of 85. There have been instances where recruits with lower IQs were allowed to enlist. Notably, during the Vietnam War, the Department of Defense initiated Project 100,000, which aimed to recruit individuals with lower mental and medical standards. This program allowed individuals with IQs as low as 80 to join the military. However, the outcomes were largely negative. Recruits with these lower IQs struggled with training and performance, leading to higher attrition rates and challenges in military effectiveness. Consequently, the program was discontinued, and the Army reinstated higher cognitive standards. IQ scores are statistically associated with many life outcomes, including education, job stability, and income. While intelligence is only one factor among many, it tends to have a measurable impact over time, especially in modern economies that reward abstract reasoning, literacy, and problem solving. Let's take a closer look at individuals with an IQ of 90 or lower, which represents roughly the bottom 25% of the population.
So the more repetitive jobs people with lower IQs are more suited to more repetitive jobs. Under 87, is there something? Well, no. Right. That's a big problem. And it's something our society has not addressed at all. Jobs for people with IQs of less than 85 are very, very rare. So what the hell are those people supposed to do? It's 15% of the population. What are they supposed to do? Well, we better figure it out, because one of the things that's happening too is that as the high IQ tech geeks get a hold of the world, the demand for cognitive power is increasing, not decreasing, right? You want to be a teller? Well, those checkout machines, they're not so simple. You want to work at McDonald's? You think that's a simple job? You don't see robots working at McDonald's. And the reason for that is that what McDonald's workers do is too complex for robots to do. So this is a discussion that no one wants to have, but that's okay. It's still a problem, and it has to be dealt with. So the US government, I think I told you this at one point already, It's illegal to induct anyone into the US Army if they have an IQ of less than 83, right? It's about 10% of the population. Because the US Army, and they've been doing IQ testing since IQ testing began, because they want everybody they can possibly get into the Army, because in peacetime, they use it as a way of moving people up the socioeconomic ladder, and in wartime, well, obviously, you need as many soldiers as you can get your hands on. And so you're not going to be any pickier than you have to be. So when the US Army says it's illegal to induct anybody into the armed forces if they have an IQ of less than 83, then you know that they've done it for absolute necessity, right? And when people have made a finding that contradicts what they want to hear and they're doing it out of absolute necessity, you can be reasonably true that it's one of those facts that just won't bloody well go away. And so you might think, well, if there's nothing for someone with an IQ of less than 83 to do in the Army, what makes you think that there's something that they can do in the general population? And then the issue is, you know, because the conservatives will say, well, they should just work harder. It's like, sorry, that ain't going to fly. And the liberals will say, well, there's no difference between people anyhow, and you can just train people to do everything. And that's wrong. So they're both wrong, and they're seriously wrong.
People with IQs below 90 are overrepresented in low-skill, low-paying jobs, often involving manual labor, repetitive tasks, or routine service work. These positions typically come with lower job security, limited career advancement, and minimal benefits such as pensions or employer-sponsored health care. Unemployment rates are also higher in this group, especially when automation or globalization removes jobs that once matched their skill level. For example, studies show that individuals with an IQ below 85 have much higher unemployment and disability rates, particularly in countries with complex labor markets. Individuals with an IQ above 130, roughly the top 2% of the population, are statistically more likely to achieve high levels of education, enter intellectually demanding professions, and build substantial wealth over time. While intelligence alone doesn't guarantee financial success, it often provides an advantage in navigating complex careers, investment strategies, and long-term planning. Studies suggest that people in this IQ range frequently work in fields such as law, medicine, finance, tech, and academia, sectors associated with high income potential. As a result, their average net worth is significantly above the population median, often ranging from $300,000 to over $1 million, depending on age, occupation, and background. By now, two important truths should be clear. First, IQ is largely genetic. While environment plays a small role, no intervention has been shown to significantly increase long-term cognitive ability beyond genetic limits. Intelligence is mostly inherited, not taught. Second, in a modern economy, a sufficiently high IQ is essential to be a net positive to a company or society. Jobs increasingly demand problem-solving, learning, and adaptability, traits closely linked to intelligence. Individuals with lower IQs often struggle to perform in roles that produce more value than they consume in training or supervision. Recognizing these realities isn't elitist, it's necessary for understanding how modern societies function. Why isn't it common knowledge?
Soviet Union didn't believe in genetics. Did you know that? Like this whole Punnett square genetics, they didn't believe in that. They considered genetics to be a bourgeoisie capitalist concept. That people like Gregory Mendel were not actual scientists, but were instead capitalist bourgeoisie, making up the whole idea of genetics and how evolution and basic biology works. Now, this would be hilarious if it didn't lead to the deaths of more than 60 million people, because they believed in the more archaic and wrong pseudoscience of the reason why giraffes' necks are long is because they had to reach up and grab for leaves, meaning that if you reach up, your neck is longer, then your children will have longer necks, and so on, continuing through, which is not how genetics work. How did this cost the lives of so many people? Well, because they were bringing that same idea into agriculture, meaning that there's all sorts of weird pseudoscientific ideas of how wheat production, how vegetables, all of these things should be done, leading to widespread famines. Now, there's a lot of different reasons for the famines, and it wasn't just in the Soviet Union, because the Chinese also followed these same ideas because they were like, oh, well, this is good communist agriculture, so we should believe in it. And so things like the Great Leap Forward and a lot of those movements and the famines and subsequent deaths because of it were all because of this fake idea of them believing that it wasn't in fact science, but it was actually some sort of bourgeoisie concept.
the denial of genetics has a long tradition. Under communist ideology, especially in the Soviet Union under Stalin, the rejection of Mendelian genetics was driven by a deep belief in the malleability of both nature and human society. Marxist-Leninist doctrine emphasized that people were shaped primarily by their environment, not by inherited traits, and that with the right social conditions, anyone could be molded into anything. This idea clashed directly with Mendel's work, which showed that traits followed fixed patterns of inheritance determined by genes. Accepting such biological limits was seen as defeatist and bourgeois, because it implied that not all people were born equal in potential, and that social engineering might have natural limits. The communists feared that genetics could justify inequality or reinforce class differences, so they preferred theories like Lysenkoism, which aligned better with their vision of human perfectibility through collective effort. In this context, science was expected to serve ideology, and any scientific truth that conflicted with the party line was suppressed. Communist and left-leaning ideologies tend to explain differences in individual and group outcomes almost entirely through environmental and social factors. According to this worldview, inequality arises not from innate differences in ability, temperament, or intelligence, but from external forces such as discrimination, oppression, or unequal access to resources. This perspective provides a powerful moral framework, one in which it becomes not only acceptable but ethically necessary to redistribute wealth and privilege from the so-called advantaged to the disadvantaged. Within this framework, successful individuals or groups, particularly white populations in Western societies, are often portrayed as having succeeded not through talent, discipline, or innovation, but through systemic exploitation. The argument follows that any disparity in outcomes must be the result of historical injustice, structural racism, or ongoing discrimination. Therefore, taking from the productive and giving to the less successful is framed not as theft or punishment of merit, but as moral correction or reparative justice. What is consistently left out of this narrative, however, is the possibility of biological or genetic differences contributing to unequal outcomes. The mention of genetic influences, particularly on traits like intelligence, impulse control, or work ethic, is considered taboo in many leftist circles because it undermines the ideological foundation of their moral claims. If differences in achievement are at least partly rooted in heritable traits, then the justification for blanket redistribution or the assumption that all groups would perform equally in a fair system begins to unravel. In short, by denying or ignoring genetic reality, these ideologies preserve a worldview in which every inequality is a moral failure, not a natural variation. This allows them to cast redistribution not just as policy, but as a form of justice, regardless of whether it aligns with reality. Migrants arriving from countries with lower average IQ levels who are not preselected based on cognitive ability are unlikely to contribute more to their host society than the resources and support they receive. In such cases, rather than being an economic asset, these individuals often become a net liability, relying on social welfare, public services, and assistance that exceed their economic output. This dynamic is not merely a matter of immediate economic contribution but also has long-term implications. The children of these migrants inherit their genetic traits, including cognitive potential, which on average may remain below that of the host country's population, such as Western Europeans. As a result, without selective immigration policies that prioritize cognitive and skill-related attributes, the cycle of lower economic productivity and higher social costs may persist across generations. This is not a statement about individual worth or moral value, but an observation grounded in empirical research on intelligence, genetics, and socioeconomic outcomes. Understanding these realities is crucial for crafting immigration policies that promote societal well-being and sustainable economic growth.